Hey there everyone, it's me Lauren, the APQS sales rep and educator, coming here to share with you guys a bit today, a little bit more on tension. Now in our previous tension video we talked about common tension problems, ways to fix them, and how to get yourself out of trouble if you ever run into it because you're doing a little too much or too little correcting. If you haven't seen that video, be sure to take a moment, head back to the APQS YouTube channel and check it out and watch that first because it's fantastic. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about something else that's going to impact your tension called directional tension. Directional tension is a fickle beast, and it is something that definitely impacts your quilt top, and it can be a hard thing to kind of get your mind around. I know it took me a long time into my quilting journey to find out what directional tension was and how it was really impacting the overall look and feel of my tension on my quilt top. So let's dig in and see how that directional tension is going to impact us. First, you want to understand how stitches are formed. Check out this GIF to see how the thread is actually pulled around the hook assembly and behind the needle to create a twist between the top and the bottom thread in between the layers of the fabric and the batting of your quilt sandwich. The hook grabs the top thread and carries it all the way around the bobbin case before releasing it to form a stitch. So then your needle needs to pull that thread up so that it can begin the process again. So you know how your machine has to be timed properly to form a proper stitch? That's because your needle and your hook need to hit at just the right moment, just the right time to get that proper stitch that you need. So when you're moving the quilting machine or the fabric, your needle flexes and bends in the opposite direction of what it is that you're moving. So if you're moving to the right, as your needle's coming up, it's resisting the fabric and it's coming out to the left. If you're moving your machine to the left, as the needle is resisting the fabric, it's being pushed out to the right. Your needle is going to be, your machine and your stitches are going to be happiest when you are moving towards you and to the right, because then if you're at the needle side of the machine, because then the needle is going to be flexing towards the hook as opposed to away from the hook. As you're moving your machine to the left and back, your needle is actually flexing away from the hook, and so it's not forming the stitches at just that microsecond of the right time. I mean, think about how fast your machine and your needle are actually moving. And think about how many times you've watched some kind of quilting tutorial online and they're like, oh, my machine doesn't like to move in that direction, right? So a lot of that could be that they're having trouble with needle flex and maybe don't realize it. Needle flex is impacted by a couple of different things. This is called directional tension. So when your needle flexes, it gives you what's called directional tension. And so as you're stitching and you're moving about and your needle is flexing towards or away from the hook, it can change how good your tension looks based off how much your needle is flexing. So there's a couple of things that we can do to really aid ourselves in preventing needle flex so that we don't have tension problems on just random loops in different places on our quilt top. Generally, directional tension problems happen in the same place, same kind of movement and shape. So you'll notice you'll have directional tension problems because you'll be stitching just fine, and then right here your machine decides it wants to be wonky and not give you as good a looking stitches. Well, right here, it's telling you that it doesn't want to pay attention. So as you're going around those faster curves, pulling your machine away from you or to the left, that's when you notice that you're going to have all of those problems. So what's going to happen is we can do a couple of things to prevent our needle from flexing too much, that it gives us issues on just, certain sections of what it is that we're quilting. Because if my tension is fine everywhere else, but I'm just having some issues on some of the curves or different places that I'm stitching, likely needle flex and directional tension are my problem. So a couple of things that I can do to fix that would be to loosen up my quilt sandwich. So I'm going to tighten up my quilt sandwich as tight as it can possibly be, but then I'm going to let it relax just a little bit. So that way you can have a little bit of, floppiness to your fabric. You don't want it to be so floppy that it's hanging out all over the place, but you do want to make sure that it's just enough so that when you're moving your machine, you can kind of see the ruler base kind of flexing under here just a little bit. Okay, so you're going to tighten it all the way, you're going to loosen it up just a little bit so that you can break it and it's just not so tight that you could bounce a quarter off of it. Alrighty? The other thing that you can do is you can slow down. It pains me to say this to you because I like to quilt super fast, but if you slow down around those curves, your needle because your needle makes so many stitches per inch, if you slow down with your regulator on or even with your regulator off, your needle is going to be able to resist the flexing because you're not moving so fast. If you need to continue to move fast, right, what you can do is up the amount of stitches that you're putting in your quilt sandwich so that your needle actually has to go in twice as fast and make more holes so that it's not flexing for longer distances as you're quilting, which will minimize the amount of flex that's actually happening. So I up the stitches on my machine so that, oops, I hit my clamps. So that as I'm stitching around, it's actually going to make more stitches and give me a much cleaner, smoother looking curve without any of the issues of having any of those threads either pop to the top or the back because my needle's flexing. One more thing that you can do to adjust how much your needle flexes is one, put in a new needle. It could be that you're using a really old needle and it just has a lot of wear and tear and miles on it, and it wants a new one. The other thing that you could do is take that needle up a size. Think about it. The bigger your needle is, the more material and metal that you have in your needle, the more it's going to resist flexing as you're moving because it's a thicker, stronger, sturdier piece of whatever metal it is that you put in your particular quilting machine that you have. So that can be fantastic too. Other factors that are really going to affect needle flex, quick things that you can look for, how dense or rigid is your batting? Are you using more than one layer of batting? Polyester batting is going to have more resistance to it than, let's say, a cotton batting. What kind of top fabrics are you using? Cotton flannels are going to be looser and easier to stitch down and to stitch through than, say, a denim, right? Or a leather or a pleather or whatever else it is that you're working with. If you've got embroidered designs, Kimberbell, lots of layers of interfacing, t-shirt quilting, all of these things are going to impact how thick and how dense that quilt sandwich is and how much your needle is going to have to fight to get in and out of the quilt top and try not to move back and forth. So I hope that these tips are helpful for you. Pay attention to all of the materials in your quilt sandwich. You can either slow down how fast you're moving so that your machine's getting cleaner stitches in there and not having to flex as hard to get into that next hole on time, right? Or you can up the amount of stitches that you have to ensure that it has more chances to make those stitches if you want to continue to move faster. So when in doubt, slow down, loosen the tension on your fabrics, and control what you can control, because you can't always control the kinds of quilts that you're putting on your machine. So I hope that these little tips for directional tension are helpful for you, and if you are someone who has been pulling your hair out because you have found that you're only having tension issues around circles or just on the edges of those feathers, this is something that is definitely going to help you quell that tension problem and take your quilting and your tension to the next level. So if I'm moving my machine towards me, my needle is bending backwards as it's coming out of the fabric, which means that it's getting closer to the hook. If I'm moving my needle away from me, my machine away from me, that means that the needle is bending towards me, because as I'm pushing this way, the needle's coming out of the fabric and going straight back in. And so what's happening is that it's moving away from the hook as you're moving backwards. Same thing if you're going left or right, your needle is moving and flexing in the opposite direction, and it will move closer in time with the hook or farther away in time with the hook. And so what'll happen is that you'll get little bits of eyelashing that can happen. Not even eyelashing, but just some odd pulls of fabric. You'll notice if you're stitching feathers or different things, as you're going around the curves, that thread is going to kind of pull in just those areas. And when it does, you know that if it's just on the outside of a curve here and there and you're not sure why the tension problems are happening, it could be because your needle is flexing too fast we like to rip around those curves, right? So your needle's moving too fast and you need to slow it down. Other things that can affect how much your needle flexes is your fabric tautness on your actual frame. So we've got our quilt frame, and along our machine everything is stationary and it's held against the bars. So if we crank back on that quilt frame too much, what's going to happen is that our quilt sandwich is now really tight. which means that our needle now has something harder to flex against as you're moving that machine around. So if your quilt sandwich is too tight, you're going to make the needle flex problem even worse, okay? So what you want to do is tighten up your frame till it gets to the tight point and release it just a little bit so that you know that your quilt top isn't too tight. You don't want to be able to bounce a quarter off the top of that thing, okay? If you're having trouble with needle flex and you can't seem to slow down enough, maybe you're like me and you're a fast quilter and you just like to quilt fast and you don't want to slow down and everything should be working properly, and you've loosened up that quilt sandwich just a little bit but you're still having a needle flex issue, what you can do is go up a size in needle, so that way you have a thicker, stronger, hardier needle that will resist the flexing as you're quilting, and it will greatly aid in fixing those random tension problems that happen as you're going around, you know, just the edge of the curve or different things. So I hope that this video was helpful for you in understanding what needle flex is and how it impacts your quilt top and how it'll make all of the difference when you're quilting on your machine to kind of fine-tune all of those little details that can happen and maybe you're not sure why. Don't forget to like and subscribe up above to the APQS YouTube channel, so that way when more of these videos come out, you can be more attuned to what's going on and YouTube can notify you as soon as they're ready. Feel free to like and share this video across different channels, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and all of the different places that we love to watch all of our quilty goodness. Thank you guys for joining me. Again, my name is Lauren with APQS Quilting. Thank y'all and have a wonderful day. Bye!